Hi, it's Imogen Lamport from Inside Out Style, coming to answer your colour and style questions. Could you share about finding a balance between boring and overwhelming when considering contrasts in texture and stylistic elements? How does that relate to and reflect my physical attributes? So when we're thinking about texture, texture can add bulk. It can also add interest. We can think about fine textures like lace, which are feminine. We can think about chunky textures like cable knit, which is much more relaxed. We can think about a texture like cashmere or angora. We can think which are soft. We can think about textures like there's a million different textures. Leather, which is a harder texture. So there's lots and lots of different texture that we can play with in our clothing. And so when we are thinking about too, what is it about you and your physicality and choosing textures? So some of the things we look at, particularly when choosing textures, is hair and skin, because these are our two most textured elements about our physicality. So if we have really smooth hair and a smooth haircut to go with it, then we'll find that more smoother textures work better on the whole. Or if we have curly hair or coarse hair or wavy hair, or a short, like a textured haircut where there's a lot of, kind of textural elements to the cut, then we might find we want to add in some texture, to a lot of texture, depending on that. Also skin. The smoother our skin, then potentially smoother fabrics, smoother textures, versus if we've got more wrinkled skin, or, then we might bring in more texture that it goes with. And this is why, boiled wool and boucle work very well on, I think about the kind of historically looking at my grandmother's age, and they'd wear like the boucle jacket, and it worked very well because they'd often have the curly set hair, and we're talking back in the 80s and 90s, the curly set hair, and they've got more wrinkled skin, and that boucle works really well. Versus if you'd put them on some silk or satin or something that was very smooth, you'd have really noticed that difference between the face and the hair and the fabric. And this is why we're thinking about harmony. It's always thinking about, well, what's the harmony I am creating between the elements of me and what's in my clothing? And so this is where it's thinking about, well, what is, are you smoother or are you more textured naturally? So are you going to go for, and what kind of textures will you go for? Because it's really light textures like, this sort of cashmere, to much heavier textures that you can, choose from. And then also, like, what's your personality as well, because personality comes into this. So if you're more feminine, you might choose a texture like lace. Now, lace can be quite a chunky texture if you've got a ribbon lace, versus it can be quite a fine texture if you've got, a very fine piece of lace. So both of those are textured. What element of that texture you're going to choose is going to be up to you. So really, when we're thinking about bringing these things together, it relates to your physicality. It relates to what creates harmony with you. This is why there's no one answer to this question. And it's also, what's the difference between boring and overwhelming? Well, in many ways it comes back to the harmony with you. So if you're very, very smooth and you're adding a lot of texture to your outfit, it may become overwhelming very easily. Versus if you're naturally textured, you're going to need a lot of texture to become overwhelming. So I think it's looking at that balance and deciding like what is your natural texture level, and, therefore what works for you. And of course, if you're more creative in your personality, you could add more different textures together, and it's going to work in a way that if you're more naturally classic or relaxed, you'll have fewer, kind of textures together, mixing textures, things like that. So that's just something to think about as far as, what you are looking for and how you want to think about textures in your outfits.